Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. All right, here we are. I'm joined with Todd McCormick. How you doing today?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We had you on from the Stash podcast earlier this year. Great conversation. I'll definitely have a link in the outro card of this episode and also in the description section so folks can easily get to that episode once they're done watching this one. But I wanted to get you onto my Garden Talk podcast so I can have you all to myself and we can really narrow down the focus to gardening, something you've been doing for a very, very long time. You had mentioned 41 years now gardening, which is a crazy amount of time. Now, as we get into the questions here, one thing I have to ask you off the bat is, of all those years gardening, I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons out there. What's one lesson from all those years of gardening that every grower should know right now?
You know, I think the KISS method, which is keep it simple, stupid, it really applies because I've gone through all phases from, starting with organics to ending with organics because for a little while, cultivation just wasn't complex enough. So there was hydroponics and aeroponics and crazy systems. And then I got into dosatrons and Wi-Fi watering. And, I think that it's all great. But at the end of the day, small batch, lot of love is where the quality's at. And the reason why a lot of us really favor the memories we had of the 80s and the 90s is because all of that kind was coming down from small batch with love, high quality, people just fawning over them. And, quality and quantity really don't go hand in hand, especially with a flower like this, because, I've said to many people many times that most well-grown flowers get destroyed post-harvest because people cut them down, don't have a place to put them, don't have humidity controlled or temperature controlled rooms that they can move them into and let them degas. Most people aren't prepared for what's going to happen after they harvest. And that's where, unfortunately, most of the damage is done. And even the best cured medicinal flowers can go south really fast. As I've seen my friends, in the early days of clubs here in the state, people would, not thinking about it, but they'd be in air-conditioned rooms with 30% humidity and they'd be opening up all these bags of flowers and not even realizing that leaving them open was damaging them and causing, the room smelled great because they were degassing all the terps. And a little at a time, every hour those things sat open, that stuff dried up and lost its greatness. And so all of the work that went into the growing and the harvesting and the curing and out the window in 2-3 hours of an air conditioned, 30% humidity room. And it's sad, and I think that happens a lot. So keep it simple and have a place for it when you cut it down.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people do overlook the whole drying and curing aspect, really curing in particular, right? So they get to the dry, the certain RH and temperature, and then they get into curing, and yeah, they're doing the burping, and they're just storing things at room temperature, and things are off-gassing and they're losing terps. So I think that is definitely a big overlooked aspect of it.
I see people with, pictures of these plants drying in these big rooms and you're like, wow, you're ruining it. All I think, you're ruining it.
Before I move on to the next question, I want to take less than 1 minute to thank the sponsors of the podcast who help make this podcast possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their Controller AI Plus, the first controller to use artificial intelligence to run your grow for you. Connect your grow devices to the Controller AI Plus and pair it with the AC Infinity app to gain access to the AI tools that predict, learn, and adapt to patterns and spikes for the most optimal environment. There is a lot more to it, so click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their Controller AI Plus, and the discount code MrGrowed15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Several additives in one blend, so you no longer have to buy individual bottles. Check it out at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. All right, so you have been growing since the 1980s. I've got to ask, I know genetics have changed quite a bit since then. How has new cultivation methods changed old school genetics?
Unfortunately, for the last 35 plus years that I've been paying attention to this, most of the cultivation is happening from people that want the quickest and fastest and heaviest, and that's not necessarily the best. And if you go back to the 50s and the 60s when we were not cultivating it and it was just all import, it was coming in from places like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Acapulco, Colombia, Jamaica, southern India, northern India. But a lot of these places are tropical, and it was narrow leaf. And there was a lot of diversity because you're coming from all these different places in the world. And then in the 70s, when what we call Afghan, but really it's a plant that broadleaf, fast flowering, heavy yielding, mostly comes from the Pakistan, Afghanistan, Hindu Kush, northern India regions. So when we look at something and call it Afghan, I always think maybe because we don't have real DNA evidence of Pakistan, northern India, Hindu Kush mountains, also Afghanistan. And then Afghanistan, with its varying geographical regions, kind of like California, has mountains and deserts and coastal communities. But Afghanistan has some diversity in its environment as well. So you have different varieties that have adapted to different regions. So what happened, in my opinion, is unfortunately we lost the diversity that we were seeing initially, that like the hippies and my mom and her friends would remember fondly. Because if you all want to grow plants that you finish in less than 9 weeks, you're going to be kind of forced into a corner. And unfortunately, the genetics are still there. I mean, in my collection with authentic genetics, I still have original haze that Skunkman Sam has had since it was first created in 69. And being the seed saver that he was, he had all of the different renditions from 70, 71, 72, 73. He liked the first one the best because he said that each year that they tried to add something to it, they kind of lost the original incredibleness that it was until it was completely lost by the late 70s because they kept trying to improve it until what was the best part of it was all gone. And that's happened a lot in the modern industry. And it's not so much the hydroponics, the organics, the outdoor, the light depth. It's the desire for this small bandwidth of genetics that is kind of cramping us all. And if you were an artist, for instance, and I was a paint maker, and I gave you a box of 16 Crayola crayons, and you only painted with the first 9, you would be leaving 10 through 16 in the box, and you'd be losing a lot of color that could be in your art. And that's the why I kind of call some of the varieties I have, like the original haze, the original like purest indica, the original skunks, the Northern Lights lines. I call them the primary colors because they really are, because they started off with just a few different groups of plants that then turned into all of these modern varieties that we know now. And what I'm kind of trying to push people to do is go back to the diversity before we were all looking for only 9 week or earlier plants and start looking at weeks 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, because now that we have legalization, you can put a perpetual harvest system into play. And it doesn't matter if it's a 16-week plant, you could be cropping out every week if you so desired and you were in a legal environment and you had a production line. You could be like Willy Wonka making chocolate and you could just have it coming down constantly. It's just that unfortunately, we also are driven by the market, and the market looks at, dare I say, bag friendly items, and they want everything to look like a perfect nug of OG or something. And the more tropical equatorial varieties with their loose and spindly flowers that adapted to high humidity areas so that they could rapidly displace the humidity and continue to grow and flower at the same time have less bag appeal. So people don't even get to the point of trying it before they reject it. And that sucks. So I think we as consumers have a lot to learn when it comes to appreciating the rainbow that is offered to us in this amazing plant.
I was going to ask you about the long flowering times and how things have shifted to really people being more appealed to shorter flowering times. I admit, myself included, just as a small home grower, it's a little bit easier to grow an 8 weeker versus a 12 or a 13 weeker, right? Just the amount of time. But I want to ask you, do you feel like since we've made this shift, are we missing specific like terpene profiles, flavonoids, thiols, effects? Are there like major differences from these longer flowering varieties to the shorter ones?
I would say, sir, all of the above. I've been teaching people for a long time that there's about a 3 week window when it comes to like early stage, peak stage, and late stage. And you get to choose kind of like an equalizer on a stereo where the recording artist gives you the music the way they liked it. And then you get to put it through your stereo and turn up the bass, turn up the treble, get it to where you like it. And it's kind of like nature handed us the recording of it. And then we get to choose, do we want early, peak, or late? Because, and I don't really think peak is a correct term, although it's the term that was used, because there's really a ramping up of the cannabinoids and terpenes, and that causes it to have a more sedative, relaxed effect at the end in late stage when all of the stigmas have withered away and the bracts have swollen up and it's covered in trichomes. You're in a much different situation than early stage where you see like red and white hairs or white hairs. To me, it's much too early, but you can still crop out at that point and have a more, if you crop out early, for instance, you'll kind of have more of a, almost like a tropical plant effect where it's like lighter and more happy in your head. And if you crop the same plant out later, it'll be more sedative and more relaxed. So I tell people to get to know their varieties because, and the way to do so is if you're growing like I grow, which is from seed to mother to cutting, and you got a bunch of cuttings of the same mother going, you can, harvest a couple, leave a few in, harvest a few more, leave a few in, harvest them all at the end, and then get to know what it was like at the beginning, the middle, and the end, and see where you liked it the best. Because you might find that it's really worth leaving in. I mean, I remember 20 plus years ago when I started distributing OG clones, and a friend of mine came to me with this like red haired, skinny little. I was like, "What is this?" He goes, "Oh, it's OG." And I said, "No, it's not." He goes, "I get the cuttings from you." And I went, "Well, what you do to it?" And he was like, "I cut it down early at like week 8." And I was like, "Go to week 10, like go to day 68. Like you don't need 70, but I definitely go to 68." He's like, "That's going to make a difference." And I was like, "You tell me." And he came back with these little nugs that were all green and looked all frosty. And I was like, "Oh, now you're doing it right." And he was like, "Dude, it made a huge difference." Because he cut down at the beginning of week 8 because he was he was just so hungry for it. And then he let it go 2 more weeks and saw the transformation. And he will never do the week 8 again. Now it's always week 10. And he's a believer after that. And I think a lot of people don't get to see. And then when you mention thiols, they are an interesting study because they only come on at late stage and then they evaporate away almost as fast. So if you really want that musty, dank, acrid gunkiness, you really got to let the thing go till it's till it's done, and then it picks up the nasties. But you've also got the buildup of terps, which are quintessential to the whole experience.
Got it. And then are you the type that is taking a microscope and kind of looking at the trichomes and seeing what color they are, whether they be cloudy or amber and so on and so
Dude, I
forth?
was the
Or
first person doing stacking photography of 2008. I published the first pictures of them in 2009, and I wrapped a couple of Lou Dogs drum sets from the Cottonmouth Kings with my macro photography. I've been geeking out on trichromes for a very long time. Rob Clark, the author of Marijuana Botany, and the other one's he's a phenomenal author. His name is Robert C. Clark. I recommend everybody look him up on Google. He's my personal hero. And way back in 1995, 96, we became friends. I read his book Sitting on a Rock in September of 94 when I was cropping out Mendocino, sitting on a rock with a big flashlight so I could see in the difference and a distance, a little flashlight so I could read his book. And it was awesome. And then I met him at the 94 Cup. I bumped into him, literally bumped into him, backed into him, and he was polite about it. And we became friends. And then I became editor in chief of a magazine, an English magazine, while I was in Holland in 96 called Hemp Life. It's available online. If you look up Todd McCormick, Hemp Life Scribed, because I have it listed on Scribed, you can download the whole PDF. But Robert Clark, gave me a couple good articles and taught me all about the size of trichromes, 60 microns to 150 microns, if anybody was wondering, and all about dry sieving and how to go through the different stages of screens and how to collect them. And he's been the most wonderful teacher. And then his book on the subject came out in 1998, which was the Bible on the book by any means. And used editions of it are selling for hundreds of dollars now. It's still just an absolutely classic book. And he really taught me a lot about it, because a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about them going all amber, and that's not true. Outdoor, they will, because it's really oxidization and decomposition is what you're seeing. You got like a little head, and there'll be a rupture. There's it called an abscission layer or something like that that's right here, and it lets oxygen in. And just like when you bite a banana and it turns brown if you leave it on the counter, the oxygen gets up in there and oxidizes the oils in the head, and that's why you see the amber color. But indoors, the same plants might not do that. Some plants will go cloudy, some plants will stay clear. And I tell people a lot of times that you're really not growing the flower. You think you are, but really what you're growing is the little trichome. And if you look closely, really peak to me is when that little trichome fills up fully and then pops. Because when they start to like give up, that's when the plant is like, no, I'm done. Show's over. Go home. Lights are on. Get out of my club. Like, that's really the point where she's not going to do any more for you. And that's definitely the point of late stage heavy harvest. And watching that is important. And a lot of people that crop out early, especially if they're extract aficionados or something, they're not gonna get the same effect as if they let it go all the way and really let it build up.
Yeah, I know some folks who just completely ignore looking at the trichomes, and they just end up doing the old school method where people just looking at the plants and seeing the receding of the hair and the changing of the colors and so on and so forth. So just want to kind of bring that up because I figured there would be some sort of emphasis on your end of checking the trichomes and seeing what colors are at.
There's a lot of people that can't see the trees among the forest, and that's exactly what you're describing, because really they miss the whole point of what they're doing. And it's sad. And at the end of the day, all the magic is happening inside of those little, and it's really not in the leaf material. It's really not in those cells. It's in the trichomes, and you really got to know what you're growing. And also, funny thing is like watching Americans grow compared to my Dutch friends, who have mastered their pre-grow, mastered their spacing, their height. It was 1994 the first time I walked into Positronics, and they had something called a show and grow, and they sold equipment and cuttings and everything, everything. And when I walked into their show and grow, they had 1,000 watt, a 600 watt, a 400 watt, a 250 watt hanging in a line with a 1 square meter box underneath it, painted really beautiful on casters. And what they would do is they would put up to 50 plants per meter in the box. And when I first saw this, I walked in and I saw these. It was fully, all of them were in there at different times, and there were little signs that said "in bloom since," so that you would know how many days it was in there. And it was like visiting a zoo with all the varieties just right there in front of you flowering, and it was absolutely stunning. And all organic, all biological, everything was incredible. And when I walked in and I saw this perfect little meter with 50 little plants, all about a foot tall, in full bloom, I asked the gentleman, his name was Peter, called himself the bush doctor. I asked him, what you trying to get off each plant? He said 10 grams. I said, wow, must be pretty easy to get 10 grams off each plant. He said, extremely easy. These that you're looking at maybe only got 2 days pre-grow after they rooted, and we put them right in here. And I was like, wow. I was like, why wouldn't you want to get them bigger? Then they would take up more space. He goes, but the way that we do it now is we have 50 little plants, 10 grams each, 500 grams, very predictable, very production, and you never have to go in there and trim it. You don't have to worry about them falling over. They're all perfect. Like, boop, come up perfect. The way to get that right is to have your cloning down perfect. And I was just like, I've really had a moment where I looked at this and went, wow, that's how you're supposed to do it. Because I had never seen that kind of synchronization of the plants. The spacing was like, there was not a centimeter wasted in this little spot. And I was just like, holy heavens. And as you looked around, there were a few less plants under the 600, a few less plants under the 400, a few less plants under the 250. And then you turn around and there was a 4 foot by 8 foot or 2 square meter table. And it had two 600s over it, and it had 100 plants, and they called that the kilo champion, because with 100 little plants popping 10 grams, bro, you get a kilo. And it was, all of it was going into one ballast box on one timer, and you could plug it into one socket and just rock out. And home growing at its best. And this was 1994, and as an American, I felt very like, wow, because, all my American friends are growing less plants. They're taller. They have shitty spacing at the bottom. They got shitty spacing next to each other. There's all this wasted space. They got good buds on top, ant buds in the middle, crap on the bottom. Light penetration sucks. Like they gotta stick them up because the things want to fall over. And I was comparing because I was doing it for 10 years at that point. Literally felt like I didn't know what I was doing until I got there and went, wow, let me get a pad and pen. What's this you say about pre-grow? How many days? I'm not shitting.
That's funny. Yeah, that sea of green technique that you're explaining there, it's super, super efficient. I've yet to do that. I've been wanting to do it. It's kind of on my bucket list to do a sea of green like that. I know in order to kind of get away with that real successfully, I should say, is got to have watering down.
Consistency and cloning is your biggest thing.
Mm.
Watering's not really gonna, as long as you're watering, you're not killing your friggin' plants. But the hardest thing to do is to get 50 clones that are all literally 50 clones, because people are inconsistent in their cuttings. For instance, when I was at Posy, I worked there. I had an office, I had a key. I really enjoyed the place. Renard was a wonderful man, and I learned a lot. And I worked with an old gentleman named Old Ed Holloway, who turned 80 that year. He was credited with teaching the young hippies in Amsterdam how to grow seedless back in the 70s because they were opening coffee shops, and trying to grow, and they really didn't understand the whole seedless part. And he came along and revolutionized it for him, and that's how he got such a reputation. And he came back to see what was going on at the beginning of '96, serendipitously when I was there, and him and I just became best friends and hung out and grew together and bred together and went through plants together for over a year. And then when I came back to California, he left Amsterdam, came back. He was actually up in Bel Air with me and went home to see his family a couple weeks before I got busted. And unfortunately, got sick, got a cold, and just figured he'd wait out there and get past his cold because he was 81 at that point, and he wasn't there when I got busted. Thank fucking heavens, and didn't go through any of the bullshit that I went through. And I wouldn't cooperate, of course. And one of the main reasons I went to prison, may he rest his soul, I'd fuck die rather than do anything to harm him. He was an angel to me, and I just love the guy. I used to squish flowers and hold them up to his nose, and he would tell me countries of origin. I'm not shit, dude. He flew around the basically the equator mostly in the '60s because he's an engineer or aeronautical engineer and had his own planes. And when he retired, he had a lot of money, and he also had military clearance because he worked for McDonnell Douglas, and he was part of the research team that broke the speed of sound out at Edwards Air Force Base. He had a fascinating history, and he was never in the military, but he was an engineer who worked for the military. So when him and his wife divorced, he started flying around and spotting plots and landing and like basically taking notes, collecting the seeds, and cruising on to the next one. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. He would land at military bases and borrow equipment to go camp if he couldn't land his planes by the fields. I was like, wow. Like his story, I wish I could put it into a script because absolutely one of the coolest adventure stories I've ever heard of. And then by the end of the '60s, he was kind of settled into California and Oregon growing herb. And that's when Amsterdam started selling herb in '74 and allowing it to be sold. He started flying it from California and Oregon to Amsterdam to bring it to them. And that's how he met Bernard Brunning, who had just started the Mellow Yellow Coffee Shop in 1974. And they became friends. And wild story, man. And really cool as shit. When he turned 80, all these old heads from all over Europe came to like pay this man and like honors. And they brought him sacks of Afghan and jars of hash. Like it was insane, dude. And we had such a great night. The man was absolutely such a sweet person. I absolutely adored him, Ed Holloway. But he was the one that was always kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't make this too complex. And I think that really kind of brought me back to organics. And now I understand micronutrients and how much they matter. And I don't use synthetic nutrients anymore. And I think fungus and microbes and bacteria, it's all very important, especially when you get into the study of thiols and you realize that they really are stimulated by sulfur being present, which is something that was removed in the synthetics because it doesn't need it. It's mostly for acid loving plants. And because it's a neutral loving plant, it really doesn't like a lot of it. But if you kind of crank it up, it really changes the aromatic structure of it because it releases all of these sulfur-based alkaloids. And it's fascinating how we have changed it through our cultivation habits and selection habits. Fortunately, I still have the genetics that predate a lot of the, I don't want to say messing up of the, but there wasn't a lot of preservation work that went on in the 80s, 90s, and beyond. And a lot of these, and I say kids, they didn't have the same agenda as the Mel Franks, the Skunk Mans, and the Seattle Gregs, where they were plant preservationists and not just constantly adding shit. And Skunk Man Sam's description of his friends in Santa Cruz who created haze originally, losing it by within 10 years, because he says it was all but gone by 78. And he released his variety in 76, the number one, which revolutionized everything. And they moved away from these longer flowering equatorial varieties that wouldn't crop out till like November to things like he had with Afghan in it that would crop out late August, early September, which made the whole thing a lot more plausible and feasible and workable, especially as the heat was coming down on us and they were basically coming after us like we were huge criminals for growing flowers. So I understand why we moved away from it, but now that it's illegal, and now that a lot of it's indoors and in controlled places like greenhouses, I kind of wish that we would move towards discovering 10 through 16 again so that we could have more diversity. And I also think more medical applications, because I think we're missing a lot when we're missing out on all of these minor and various terps that we're just not seeing combinations of in the first 9 weeks.
Man, so much history in regards to this plant, and things have changed so much over the years. I want to fast forward a little bit and kind of get to current state. You talked a little bit about how you grow. You like to grow organic. Let's talk about the medium a little bit. What's your preferred grow medium today and why?
For the past almost 15 years, I'd say it's been Roots Organic Lush. Back when the company was started, it was started by someone named Austin, and Austin and I were friends. He was truly one of us, so to speak. Really nice guy, super, super smart. He invested to start Grow Magazine off initially. Like, he's just that dedicated. And I wrote for Grow for over 5 years. So we were all kind of friends on that level. And I got to visit their facility in Oregon, 2014 maybe. And I was absolutely floored. It's so clean. I mean, it was so clean. It was incredible, impeccable, really. Couldn't have been done better, or he would have done it better. They were making their own perlite. He showed me a perlite popping machine, like over the top. And then he had his own lab doing uptake testing, because his point was there's no reason to spend any money on anything that doesn't need to be in this bag, because you're going to have to charge your customer for something they don't need. And that's just not what they're trying to do. So he was doing uptake testing, and really Lush represents millions of dollars of research. And it's the only medium that I found that didn't come with gnats and black flies and white flies free of charge, because it feels like a lot of the other stuff, and I don't want to name them, but unfortunately, some of the more popular and easier to get brands always seem to have these root-borne problems, and it's because I think they're selling us stuff that just isn't that sterile. Like back in the 90s, you used to be able to get greenhouse soil that was like maybe baked or something, so there was no like living bugs in it. There was just nutrients. That was nice. And that's kind of what Lush is now. But most of the other ones, I think, are bugs included, unfortunately. So I really do like Roots Organic Lush. I don't work for them. And I think he sold the company. He doesn't even own it anymore. So, but they still have great products, very consistent. And what I like about it, it's an all mix, so that you can just water with straight water for the first like 6 to 8 weeks. And if you're growing seedlessly, I really recommend allowing the nutrients to just fall off, because if you start getting into the research and science, it shows a decrease in chemical levels across the board with increased fertilizer. So if you really want to grow the most, potent stuff, you really don't want to over fertilize, especially towards the end. You want it to just kind of, as organic nutrients do, fall off in 8 weeks and just break down and rinse them through, and allow it to kind of have its natural deficiencies. because things like humic acid and stuff clearly lower the levels across the board, and that's kind of not what we're trying to do. So I've moved away from synthetics and kind of re-embraced organics, and that was quite a while ago.
I'm looking up Roots Organics Lush right now, and I see it's a peat moss, perlite, there's cocoa in there, and a whole bunch of other. It looks like everything here is all natural amendments in here. So, like you said, yeah, you should be able to get several weeks of nutrition right out the bag. Now, after that nutrition depletes, can you walk us through your approach to feeding? Like what amendments to use and when, and so on and so forth?
Depends on what you're growing. Because now, all right, for instance, I don't fertilize my seeds plants the same way I grow my seedless plants, because when I'm growing my seed plants, I basically add like 4 to 5 weeks to wherever I think they're going to finish and just let them go. Because what happens is I go with natural pollination because I like natural males, and instead of just like hitting them with frozen pollen that has been stored in a freezer and hitting them one day, which you can get very consistent, but I like letting the male be in there for a couple weeks. So that means there's a couple weeks on maturity of the seeds, and I let them all go longer. And it sounds kind of cray, but I throw away all the plant material that, other than the trichomes and the seeds, of course. But the plant material, because after you let it go past peak, the terpenes kind of, it's not the same. It like the plants just, the seeds are really nice and mature, but the rest of it's like, man, you gave up on me. And it's just because I was going for the seeds and not the flowers. And I pump them full of nutrients. I basically amend with nitrogen and things like that, because I don't want them to have nutrient deficiencies, because I want all that energy to go into the seeds. Um, but the opposite would be seedless, because I'll take Roots Organic Lush, put a clone in it, move it right into flower that day, and then just let it go, and then clear water, and it will maintain the plant health throughout the 8-9 weeks that you have it, and then it'll just drop off. And now, if you're growing something like my combinations with haze, then yeah, I would recommend in week 7, 6, 7, maybe giving it a little more nitrogen, bumping it up a little, because if you expect to keep it alive into weeks 10, 11, 12, you really got to understand that it's going to need the crutches for growth, and if it all just peters out, the plant will peter out. So you can amend a lot of different ways. I mean, back in the day, I used to just go buy those boxes of back guano and seabird guano and that you could get at any store, and it works. I mean, you don't have to go, all advanced nutrients and buy like 18 things off the shelf and go mix them together like you're a scientist with a schmuck on. It really doesn't make it better. And in some ways, it messes it up, because you can get nutrient lockout, you can get pH issues, you can mess the whole little concoction up because one of the things was too rich, or didn't play well, and that sucks. So I don't know. Like, this kind of brings me back to like kind of keeping it easy and not overfeeding. I think that it's the most overfed plant on the planet. I do watch my pH closely. I'm a 6.3, 6.4 guy when I'm going into organics, and consistency is king. Humidifying my rooms made the biggest difference, because around 2014, I started paying attention to VPD, maybe a little earlier, maybe it was 2013, which meant that I realized quite quickly that I was running too dry of a room. And when I realized that, I went and I bought these things called Portacool, and they're these massive humidifiers that cost anywhere. I think the cheapest one I got was like 700, and the biggest one I got was like 25. And it's like really tall. It has a wet wall and a big fan, and you hook a hose up to it, and it pushes it through. And I hooked it up to a humidifier so I could bring my room up between 60 and 70% humidity in order to keep it in the green zone for vapor pressure deficit. And powdery mildew went away. The suppleness of the leaves were there. The leathery vibe of the leaves were there. The plants required less water because they didn't have to like basically uptake and sweat it out the way that they were doing in a dry room. It changed everything. And I highly recommend a good air system, because not having a place to put the plants after harvest is one big thing, but not having your VPD, which really means vapor pressure deficit. It means you don't have enough humidity in your room And that's common anywhere indoors or in a greenhouse or anywhere with lights, because the lights burn up the humidity, the heat burns up the humidity. You have to put it back. And, if anyone's walked into a good greenhouse, the first thing that hits you when you walk in is how humid it is. And when you don't have that, which is why I paint my grow rooms different. I use a semi-gloss or gloss paint. I treat it like it's a bathroom. I will first put some kills down as a primer, and then I'll use some semi-gloss or gloss white, and I do the ceilings, walls, floors. And the real reason is because I want it to be impervious to any type of molds or any issues like that. I want it to be easy to clean. And then I crank up the humidity. I like to have my humidity between 60 and 70% in my mother room. And I like the same in my flower rooms, unless I'm growing something like Purist Indica. And then what I like to do is actually bring my humidity down to between like 50 and 60%, which is still pretty high, higher than normal for a room like I'm in. Because you could get mold issues on some of the bigger bud plants indoors, even if your humidity's high, but usually that won't happen. In my greenhouse, I have to dehumidify because those buds get really, really big, because nothing like the sun, and I have experienced mold inside of the buds, which breaks my heart. So in that case, in my greenhouse, for instance, I have a humidifier, a dehumidifier, a heater, and then the fans. And I remember the first time my friend walked in, he's like, "What, do they just battle it out?" And I was like, "Yes, actually they do. The humidifier will come on if it goes below 60. The dehumidifier will come on if it goes above 80. The heater will come on if it goes below 65. And the fans will kick on if it goes above 78. And he was like, "So they do battle it out." I was like, "That's exactly it. If it isn't in balance, something's going to trigger it to try to push it into balance, And then on days when it was just cranking hot and I can't control the heat, I just turn up the humidity, because if you look at a VPD chart, it can be 90 degrees in your greenhouse. If you have 90% humidity in there, the plants can handle it. And really, it's about, think of it like a race car. You get a race car on a track, you got to drive the track. You can't just expect it's going to be a straight line where you could just floor it. No, there are curves, there are nuances, there's berms, there's all sorts of little things. There's rocks you got to go around. Same with gardening, and you're basically working against the environment, which is always changing. And it's frustrating for me because I have over 17,000 growers behind me now with Authentic Genetics. I have growers in all 50 states and over 23 countries, and I'm grateful for that. But at the same time, I deal with a lot of people that have no clue what they're doing. And I'll have people that don't pay attention to humidity at all, and they're growing at like 6,800 feet in February, and they're like, "Why are my plants herming?" Well, it's cold as F. You're not heating the water. You're humidifying your area. It's dry as could be. All these things stress the plant out. So the plant's reacting to its environment. And you have to be the buffer between that ice cold weather outside and that dry ass, you got a heater going and you've got everything just drying the room out. And then you're like, "Why isn't my plant growing?" And you've got to understand the environment the plant wants to be in compared to the environment that you're in. And that's usually very different.
Thanks for breaking down the difference in growing techniques for the seeded plants versus unseeded plants. I think that's a real important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Now you bring up stressing the plants and herming, and I've got to continue on this conversation here. There are some breeders out there that say that if your plant herms, it is 100% the breeder's fault, no matter what way the plants were grown. Other folks are going to say, no, well, if it's too high of stress, too high of light, if the grower makes a problem, that could potentially herm. That's a grower error. Which side do you put yourself on?
Well, I'm going to be really rude and say the first group that you mentioned, it says it are idiots, because we wouldn't have feminized seeds if it wasn't capable for our flower to reverse under chemically induced stress, because that's all a feminized seed is a chemically induced hermaphrodite. End of story. You can use colloidal silver, you can use SDS, you can use a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, you stress the plant out and it hermed. And okay, great. And but if it wasn't capable of that, then it wouldn't be possible. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that it's capable of that just means that under certain conditions, in this case STS or Gibraltar gas or a bunch of shit, it'll do it. And also under dry conditions, cold conditions, bad watering conditions, pH conditions, what you're spraying on the plant can stress it out. There's so many things, even in your nutrients, PGRs, plant growth regulators. And what really sucks is that I even know there was a study, was it like 2018, and a bunch of OMRI stuff that you thought was organic through Oregon came back with PGRs in them that weren't listed in the table of ingredients because they were trying to get an edge on their competition. Well, great, but now you're creating a stressor that even the grower doesn't know he's dealing with because he's looking at the label and he's like, I don't see a problem. But the plant is stressing out and Herman, and he doesn't know why. And personally, you could make any good plant Herm under the right conditions. And I mean, old Ed taught me how, for instance, to reverse plants with ice water in the first couple of weeks of flowering. And because if you water with ice water in the first couple of weeks, the plant doesn't dig it and stresses out and usually Herms. And not usually, because it depends on the variety, because everything's variety specific. Some things are more environmentally sensitive than others. It's just what it is. But all of it is environmentally sensitive to some degree because feminized seeds, or we wouldn't have them. So people that say that it's the genetics, like they're going to be able to make a genetic that doesn't under any circumstances. Right. And I'm sure every Republican parent wants to have a kid that's not going to grow up to be trans or gay. But guess what? Nature has their own plans. And, there's nothing you can do. And Dick Cheney's going to have to embrace his lesbian daughter because you know what? Nature does what nature wants to do. And depending on how you're cultivating, you might run into a situation where that particular variety or even that particular plant, because I would argue that every single plant is different if you look close enough. Because even if you have a family of plants and they're all brothers and sisters, and you look at the chemical compositions and the terp levels and everything, guess what? You're going to see variation. And just like if your parents get together and have 12 kids, they're all brothers and sisters, but all those sisters and all those brothers can be different heights. Some have freckles, some don't. Some favor the mom, some favor the dad. Some don't look like either. And that's nature. And I think a lot of people miss this with it because they don't do the kind of numbers that I do. When I look at families of plants, I see a lot of diversity. I mean, very few plants are as true breeding or as, I would say, uniform and consistent as skunk one, for instance. Very few varieties, if any, have the relatively true breeding features that has. But that took a lot of work. I mean, Skunk Man is world renowned for a reason. And it was because so many people experienced his work and went, wow, how'd you do that? I mean, because you can pop 1,000 of his seeds and they come up looking like 1,000 cuttings. And you're just like astounded by it. And people that have been growing it for, since he released it in 76 will tell you how remarkable it is, mold and mildew resilient it is, how fast it finishes, the quality of it. Like I get why it's so popular. It's like the Ferrari that wins at Le Mans time after time after time because it's just so dialed, Not that I follow Le Mans and I don't know if Ferrari's won in a long time, but hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that question because when I first heard that, I was like, that's kind of an interesting thought, whether or not it could be bred completely out or not. And I always thought about, hey, when you're growing this plant and you continue growing past the harvest window, well, what happens? The plant has a last ditch effort. It starts throwing out those nanners, the stamens, and that's considered a Herm in a sense, right? So it's like, that's kind of the grower's fault for letting it go on too long.
And also, though, unfortunately, I don't. So part of the problem is, especially if it only throws nanners in late stage, nutrients. What are you giving it? Are you messing up its pH? What? Like I always go backwards because like I have photos of it perfect. Like I've been able to grow perfectly balanced plants that have perfect green leaves, perfectly finished flowers, no stimulants. Like I have photo on photo on photo of this I could prove. If you go through my Instagram, you'll see them. People ask me, I've had people ask me because I cut flowers and put them on my vase on my desk all the time. And people will sit down at my desk and look at them and look at me and go, is that real? I'm like, yeah, of course it's real. And, they touch it and they realize it's real, but it looks fucking fake to them. And they just blown away by that. And you can keep them perfectly balanced if they're in the right humidity and temperature and and getting the right nutrients and right pH, they will finish perfect. There's no deficiency. But again, then this is where I was getting into testing stuff, and SC Labs was, and I'm good friends with Alex, and trying to learn. I mean, I've been growing for over 40 years, but I still learn constantly, man. Like when I started learning about thiols a few years back, I was blown away. I mean, because we thought it was various terpenes that were causing the smell, but then the scientific paper came out saying it was thiols, and that became an interesting rabbit hole to go down, because it wasn't just about, oh, they make them. It was like, how do you enhance them? And if anybody's watching this, looks up manipulating the thiol content in hops. That's exactly how we all learned about it, because it was the beer industry that realized their beer drinkers liked a skunky smelling ale, and they, having deep pockets, put a bunch of money into figuring out what the compound was that caused this skunky smelling ale, and then figured out how to basically manipulate it so it would be more. And it all boils down to manipulating the sulfur content in the fertilizer that they were growing the hops in. And this matters because hops and our favorite flower are so closely related botanically that it works for both. And it's a fascinating study when you get into it. And even for people that remember, kind back in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, it was all small batch grown to usually peak perfection, as opposed to, and we didn't really have time to cure it. Usually you would get it, it would be sticky, it'd be in the bag, it would stick to the bag, you'd need scissors to cut it up. And it was because it wasn't cured that well or that long. It was just dry enough to like get it out the door. Well, those two factors, organically grown and like quickly dried and out the door, all add up to thiols, because having the rich organic mixtures, having the sulfur, we didn't have general hydroponics and advanced nutrients in the 80s, for instance, or the early 90s. So those weren't options to go synthetic. We were all throwing seabird guano, back guano, magnesium sulfate, like everything in the kitchen sink in the soil just to make it work. And then we were cropping out quickly. And now that you study thiols, they develop in late stage, they dissipate away within a couple weeks of harvest. So if you go to late stage and then you give it to people within a week of cutting it down, they're going to smell that stinky thiol experience, and it's going to register with them. Nowadays, it's dried perfectly, it's over cured, it's, put in a jar, it's all but lost. And also, they're not running it to peak usually because they're on a schedule and they just want to crop out. It's all, unfortunately, just making, concessions to get it, to market as quickly and as profitably as possible, unfortunately, to the peril of the consumer.
Science has uncovered so much over the years. Thiols kind of in us, our general learning of what it is and how it's impacted. We learn so much. This conversation going from old school to new school genetics really is probably an eye opener for quite a few folks that are tuning into this. And one thing I want to transition to now, which kind of relates to all this, and I believe you're not a big fan of it, is autoflowers. This is something that has come up over the past 10 years or so. There's been rapid advancements in autoflowers. But I know you have been on the record very outspoken about you don't like autoflowers. Talk to us about that.
Well, dear sir, I believe they are throwing away all of the decades of work we went through for the highest quality for a little bit of convenience. And it goes down to people not understanding how plants work, not understanding that all of the plants, if you put them outside between June 20th and basically May 1st, they will automatically flower because that's the season they're in. The only time it will not automatically flower is between May 15th and pretty much June 20th, which is summer solstice most of the time, or around there. And that's our spring growth time. We mimic that with a mother room. No, I don't like autoflowers. I think they're crap. I think they're misapplied. A lot of people try to say that they're ruderalis from Neville, and that's not true. Neville was distributing ruderalis seeds through the 80s and 90s. Not a single person from 85 to 2000 ever said that ruderalis was automatically flowering. They didn't come around till Sasha, the joint doctor, was working around his dad's hemp stuff and started figuring that some of the stuff that he had that was hemp mixed with Williams Wonder basically started flowering automatically. it halves the amount of cannabinoids. So if you start off with 20, it'll go down to 10. And there have been people trying to get it to go up, but there's so many drawbacks. For instance, you can't mother them. So you can't, like, for instance, I've had OG Kush in my garden since November 2004. Forget it. With the auto, never going to happen. You can't control the pre-grow. So you can't grow a big plant and, those 20-foot plants you see Jorge Cervantes walking under, forget it. Never going to happen with an auto because those guys would pre-grow the plant from January, sometimes December all the way until May 15th, bring them outside when they're 10 feet tall, put them in a 300-gallon smart part, build a trellis, let them get 20, 30 feet high, get 5 to 10 pounds. Never going to do that with an auto. I feel like they're a big scam by the Europeans mostly to continue to sell us crappy seeds that are half hemp because all these people are getting them thinking that it's more convenient. It's low quality. You can't control the grow. You can't keep them as mothers. Most people that grow them are not happy with how they taste, how they smell, and how they performed. And your SOL, whatever you get is whatever you get. They go, they grow, they pop, 20 inches, 30 inches tall, they're done. And whatever they felt like giving you, you got. That's not cultivation. That's growing a weed. Like you got no control over it. So I hate that they're doing this. I hate that they're mixing it with all our high quality genetics. They are literally lowering the quality of genetics by introducing hemp into them. Like we did all this work to separate away from the industrial side of it and to get to the high quality side of it. And they're throwing it all away and trying to convince people that it's better, more convenient, easier, new and improved. And I'm like, stuff it up where the sun don't shine. I hate it. And I, decades I went for the highest quality and no, it's worse than these guys that were growing only 8 and 9 week plants. Because now they're growing plants that are even worse and bottlenecking the genetics even worse. And I have nothing good to say about it. And yeah, there's been some advancements, but it started as crap and a majority of it is still crap. And if you don't believe me, buy some of the crappy seeds and don't mother them. Don't clone them. Don't keep them. Just grow them and smoke them and then go back to something like I have, which is regular high quality genetics that have been proven to be awesome. I don't know, something like Hayes over 55 years, something like Skunk One over 50 years, or coming now, it's 49 years it's been on the market. Or the Steve Murphy Afghan, he gave that to Greg in 79. Still the best fast flowering broadleaf I've ever grown in my life. I mean, the NL2 is the fastest broadleaf I've ever grown in my life. Quality's stupendous. And the NL5 is amazing too. Christmas tree, pine. It's amazing. And I don't know why people are throwing away quality for a little bit of convenience, but it's because most people don't know how plants work and don't understand, right now, for instance, they could put a plant outside. Nothing they can do is going to stop it from automatically starting to flower just because of the season we're in. And people this is what a 12-12 flower room is indoors. Automatic flowering. And I kind of hate it. So there you have it. I hate auto flowering and the horse it rode in on.
Yeah, I think one of the strongest arguments that I hear is that it's easier because you don't have to change the light cycle. And my response to that is, well, big deal. You change the light cycle. It's like, that's not that difficult to do, right?
But may I interject? That is the beauty of it. The fact that we can have it go from 18, grow it to the point we want it, flip it, and then finish it and know what it's going to do. And also keep it under clones. I mean, the whole point of sex and selection is lost with the autos because you cannot keep them. You can't find a good auto mom and be like, yeah, I'm going to keep this. No, she's going to flower. She's going to flower if you clone it. The clone's going to flower. It's crap on every level. And people that are embracing it are doing it because they're hustling you seeds. They are literally hustling these seeds to people, and people are buying them and not realizing the limitations of what they have. You buy a pack of 10 seeds from me, you could literally do a sex and selection. Let's say you get 5 boys, 5 girls. Out of the 5 girls, you pick one you like, throw away the other 4. You could literally be growing that cuttings of cuttings of cuttings for the next 40 years if you wanted to. The same cutting, same quality, same stuff. Never going to do that with autos. Autos are just crap. And I really think it's a hustle. And I think it's even feminized. I'm not the biggest fan of feminized because it also represents the end of a bottleneck. Somebody else did the selection for you. And in my experience, most of the time, feminized are not as environmentally stable as regs. And if you do a good section selection with regulars, you're going to get a much better end product usually, because even if you have a family of plants, let's say any of the ones I have, skunk, haze, whatever, you get to choose the female you like. But if you buy a feminized, you got what that guy chose. And that might not be what you like. It might not be the structure, or it might not be the smell. It might not be the high. It might not be what you like. And you lose the ability to choose once you go feminized, once you go. And I will release some feminized of things that are already bottlenecked, like OG, Trainwreck, a few of the ones like Sour D. We don't have the mothers to those. We cannot recreate those plants. They're clone-only cultivars. So, yeah, great. Make fems of those all day. But if you have the whole variety, there's no reason to make fem seeds of like haze, because you could just get regular seeds, pick your favorite, and go from there. And you're much better off than letting some guy in Spain who's just cropping out for cash pick a female and then just throw it in. And that's really, I hate to say it, I don't like the white labeling of seeds either. I think they're bastardizing the whole. There's no continuity. There's no. You're not really getting White Widow, and they're putting White Widow autoflower. It's like, that's White Widow crossed with hemp. And if they even started with White Widow to start with, and it's just, I hate what they're doing to the genetics. A lot of what I'm trying to do with authentic genetics is to re-empower the community and give them back what I call the primary colors, so that they can now reimagine all of these hybrids once again, but with, heaviest and fastest flowering not being what they're worried about, but like the highest quality. Doesn't matter if it takes 11 weeks. Doesn't matter if it takes 13 weeks. What's the best? And that's really what I represent. And I don't use machines, man. I tell people all the time, machines don't buy this stuff. Humans do. And realistically, I've been a vegetarian for 31 years. Most of my friends, not so much. They don't eat for nutrients, just like we don't smoke for levels of what's on the label. It's really all about what you like. And like, for instance, Mel Frank started getting more of his stuff tested back around 2007. And he calls me up one day and he says, "Hey, man, I got my stuff tested. What do you think it came out at?" Oh, mid-teens to mid-20s. He said, "Yeah." Because guess what? How much my favorite one is? I said, "I don't know." Mid-teens. He said 7. I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Right." He goes, "But if I need a little more, I just smoke another one." He goes, "But I like how it tastes. I like how I feel. It's the terpenes that are modulating the effect of it all. And it's like food. If you like how that burger tastes, you're going to eat the whole thing. You might even order a second. But if you don't like how that thing smells, you don't like how that thing tastes, it doesn't matter how nutritious it is. You're not going to eat it." And that's the same with these 30% numbers on crap that doesn't even make you feel like it's 10. And this is where I kind of be like, throw all that malarkey aside and start using humans, because it's the humans that have to enjoy it when they open the jar and they smell it and they get inspired. And, when you think about it, it's a very tactile experience. People want to touch it. They want to smell it. They want to feel it, break it up, like experience it. And if you just hand them something that's dry and crumbles and doesn't have great scent, you've ruined the experience for most of them. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think that, this is what I think a lot of production they have to learn, is that we want quality overall. We really want that experience to be something that we remember for a long time. And, fortunately with what I'm doing, I get a lot of feedback from people that are like, "These are, time capsules in a seed. You're bringing me back to my youth." And because they want to experience that again. And I love that. And I feel grateful to be able to do that.
You bring up feminized, and it made me think of this common question that's usually asked by so many people, which is, should you avoid using feminized seeds to breed with? For example, if you plant a whole bunch of different feminized seeds and you select one and you want to use it for a breeding project, is that okay? Or some people say that there's downsides to doing that.
At the end of the day, if you make something that you like, you've won. I mean, this whole thing isn't about, did you, the best engineer or whatever. These guys, there's a new generation of wannabe breeders that wear schmucks and think because they got a PhD, they're smart. And there has been no that's been made in a lab that has like really been favored by the community. It's all been backyard gardens, guys like Skunkman Sam who had no education, dropped out of high school, and was self-taught. It's all about people that have a passion for it. And if you use a feminized and you make something that you like, who cares? You won the lottery. If you use a feminized and you make something that you don't like, throw it away. Try again. And I'll take it even further because Mel Frank, who's 81 now, he 15 years ago sent me some seeds that were S1F1, and I looked at it and my brain went, how? And I called him up and said, how can it be both? How can you have an S1, which is a self first generation, and it be an F1? And he said, well, Todd, I got sick of males a long time ago. So what I do is I will reverse them. I will collect the pollen. I will dry the pollen. I will store it in the freezer. And then when I want to use that pollen on another plant, I will then introduce that pollen to the other cutting. And it is the first generation of those two genetics coming together. But there is no Y chromosome, just XX. So there are no males. So it is S1 pollen on a new plant. So what else do I call it other than S1F1? And I was like, this is why you're Mel Frank, and this is why I'm your student, because you just blew my mind a little bit. And I was like, of course you don't want to deal with males anymore, because why guess, right? Why? If you got a good girl you like and a good boy you like, and let's see how they gel together, and then you get their offspring, who are ironically all girls too. And I'm just glad women can't do this in bars, because us guys would be totally out of luck, man, because he just eliminated males in his breeding regimen. And he gets XX everything and feminized everything. And if he likes it, if he doesn't like it, out the window it goes and he tries again. So I don't see there being a bad side to it per se. But the thing is where you fall off is that if you have the whole variety, like I do of, let's say, haze or skunk or purest indica, and you boil it down to one plant, and then you use that one plant, you're kind of, this is the bottlenecking of the genetics like I'm talking about. So you lose diversity, but at the same time, so what? If you're going to breed together something like OG Kush and, Blue Dream or whatever off the top of my head that are two clone-only plants, you can do it and then see what the effects are, see if you like it. There's no harm done. I mean, again, if you like it, you win. If you don't like it, try again. That's it. At the end of the day, it's really you that has to like it. And I get people ask me all the time, can I breed with this? Can I breed with that? Try it. I don't breed hypothetically. I breed in real life. And I've made a lot of, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but I've crossed things together and been like, that didn't work. Throw it out. Try again. And shit, nobody even knows. Never mind, no harm done. Nobody even knows what I did. And it doesn't matter. And then when I make things that really work, like my purple phenotype crossed with NL2, I love it. My On Haze by NL2, people freaking still send me emails all the time saying how much they love it. I mean, the leaves that are like not just the little sugar leaves, but the fan leaves, they get resin all the way to the tips. It's insane. But this is through human selection. And the machines didn't really matter. It was me going, that one, ooh, that one smokes the best. And I also tell people this, don't judge a book by its cover. If we did, the world would not know OG Kush, for instance, because it grows kind of lanky. It's environmentally sensitive, not the best yielder. I could, not the quickest flowering, but the flowers are phenomenal. And so what I do when I'm doing my section selection is I let them all go. I take pictures, I take notes, but I dry them, I cure them. Whichever one I smoke first wins. And then that becomes the favored one, because I can, like I said earlier in this conversation, cause that plant to give me 10 grams or 10 pounds. It just becomes pre-grow. And so now I'm not limited to what the plant does in its growing stage. So I really don't judge it by how much it yielded or any of that, because I can adjust to what the plant does through understanding it and putting it in the right environment that doesn't stress it out, puts it in a little neighborhood of its friends, maximizing its output. I feel like I control the plant more than the plant controls me. Maybe that's why I'm the one that owns the seed company, because I have it just, I don't know, I've got a very good understanding of it, and it works. Once you understand how it works, it's easy to work with it.
Well said. Now, as we get towards the end of the episode here, I want to give you the opportunity to tell the listeners how they can find you. And do you have any upcoming releases or projects that you want to talk about?
You can find me at agseedco.com. Look up Authentic Genetics on Google. Todd McCormick, you'll find me. I'm the only one, it seems like, in the world that has anything to do with our favorite flower. But I got another book coming out. It's called From Cancer to Cannabis, The Essential Guide to the Endocannabinoid System. And what I really am focusing on doing now is teaching people about their ECS and about the essential fatty acids found in hemp seed oil and how W6 and W3, which are essential fatty acids, are the precursors to things like anandamide, which is the internal neurotransmitters that our body makes in order to balance our system. And I have a really wonderful piece by Robert Clark. It's about 19,000 words called Fragrant Medicine that focuses on terpenes. And I'm very excited about that book. And then I'm going to try to talk my friends that made, you can't see them, but The Union and the Culture High documentaries. The Union came out in 2008. It's a historical documentary. And then The Culture High came out in 2014. It's more of an advocacy film. But if I can talk them into it, the third one will be about the endocannabinoid system, because now it's going to be like, haha, you're making the same chemicals in your body as the plant, so haha. And I think people just need to understand it as a medicine better. So my focus is on that. I'm going to be putting out a cultivation book, and then I'm going to put out another book called Lifetime of Freedom Was Worth 5 Years in Prison, and it's about my activism and my cancer history, and a little bit about my experience just trying to help change the world.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for those books, and I'll be purchasing them and reading them once they release. So thanks for mentioning that one. And I'll definitely have a link to Todd's Instagram down in the YouTube description section below, so you can easily get to him, give him a follow. Todd, I'd love to have you on in the future, man, to get more in depth about breeding. I mean, AGC Co, you talked a little bit about it, but your specific breeding techniques, I'm sure the audience would love to know the nitty gritty of things. So maybe sometime next year we can get you back on the podcast. If we do end up getting Todd back on the podcast, please leave some questions for him down in the comment section below. I can potentially use some of those in the next episode if he decides to come on once again. I want to give a thanks to the folks that support on Patreon, patreon.com/MrGrowit. 100% of what is donated through Patreon goes right back into the podcast. So thank you so much. The folks being scrolled on the screen right now are in the producer tier. Special thanks to you. Todd, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me on, and I hope you have a great day too. Thanks for everybody who listened.
Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.